Hello everyone, welcome back to another Flesh and Blood video. In this one, we'll be taking a look at the brand new promo hero to Flesh and Blood, Ira Scarlet Revenger. Ira isn't a new hero, since she was the first one that we've seen. Although, since she's gone in Blitz, this is the only spot you really get to play her in competitive events. And I mean, her ability is just as strong in CC as it is in Blitz. Even though it's very simple, she gets a lot of value every turn from it. So, really, with that, let's get started. Ira Scarlet Revenger is a 4 intellect, 40 health ninja hero. She is the extremely simple ability of your second attack each turn gets +1 power. This means that every turn, you get +1. Because you always have your weapons to swing with, and you're probably playing an attack after anyway. Ira saw a ton of play in Blitz. She is LL'd in Blitz, so you're unable to play her there. And she is a ninja, which means that there are no other good ninjas in the format, because right now, Katsu's pretty bad. One of the worst heroes in the game. Vi might actually get better next set, which I'm pretty excited for, because we are getting a Draconic set next. And Zen just kind of fell off, to be honest. But Ira is really, really good. If you want to be playing Ninja, you should be playing Ira. Even though she's not really doing the Ninja thing, she's really, really good. Her ability is very similar to KO. KO obviously has to jump through a little more hoops, having to discard a card every turn to keep up the +1, and not getting it on his first turn as well, because he doesn't have it always at the start of a turn if he had a might. So if he did something last turn, he gets it for his next turn. Ira just always kind of has it. So it's a really good thing for this hero. You just get so much value. And yeah, I mean, longest explanation I think I've done about a hero, but even though it's an extremely simple ability, she's just very, very good. For the weapon, we're playing 2 Harmonized Kodachi. We do have a Zephyr Needle in the sideboard. We will talk about that when we talk about the sideboard. But Harmonized Kodachi is just your bread and butter. It's a 1 resource for 1 attack. If you have a 0-cost card in your pitch zone, which you probably will, every blue in this deck is free. The Kodachi gets go again, so you can pitch a blue to swing with it, and then either play a 2-cost card straight after, which your Ira will pump, or you can swing at the other Kodachi and have that one come in for 2, which yes, your opponent might block it, but then they're blocking with the card on a Kodachi, which is still good for you. Pretty much, if you use Ira's ability on Kodachis, it pretty much just turns them into a harder to block Searing Ember Blade. With an easier condition to give go again, because you can start with them. So, Kodachi is just kind of your bread and butter. Again, you do play Zephyr Needle in the board, at least one, but for most matchups, you're not bringing in Zephyr Needle. Really just your aggressive matchups. Ira isn't, I'd say she's the slowest ninja. Because she doesn't have any like tutor or card draw ability. She just gets more damage. So she gets to play more of a mid-range game, which is really, really good right now in the format, because every deck is either aggressive or disruption. Mid-rangey decks have a lot of block to help you versus that aggression, which Ninja actually has a ton of tools to help you versus that as well, which we'll talk about. And against late game decks, it's pretty good to be mid-range, and especially good to be Ninja because of Harmonized Kodachi. For our headpiece, we're playing Mask of Momentum. This is the only headpiece in the deck. I think it's worth it. Versus decks that don't block you, so aggro decks, you're probably just playing 2-card hands every turn. You're gonna be trying to keep a blue and a 1-cost card, and then go Kodachi 1-cost card, and then that lets you get Arsenal, so you can block a little more, or get a little wider turns if you need to. So Mask just has that value. You don't want any of the other ninja masks because they are really just one-time use. And I would say you don't particularly want any of the generic helmets. I could see you wanting to play Balance of Justice. It's not in this list, but you could. I just think Mask of Momentum is so worth it because it makes your Kodachis a feasible on-hit to where your opponent wants to actually block them, and then you can throw a real on-hit like a Sensor or a CNC afterwards to make your opponent block again. For the chess piece, we're just going with Tunic. Ninja does not have a base chess piece that generates resource. They technically have one, but all it does is block, so it's not really that good. Tunic is just the best option, though. There are times where you get to throw a Looking for Scrap for free. You get to throw a CNC off just a blue and with double Kodachis. It just helps you go wide on a lot of turns, helps you pay for a lot of your turns. Sometimes you will draw 4 red hands. It just happens. Tunic can help alleviate that. So Tunic is generally just going to be the best option for you on Ira. For arms, we are playing Tiger Stripe Shuko. These can be a little hard to actually trigger. There are times you can trigger it, which is specifically why we're on the shoe option that I will talk about. But mainly they're just here because they're 2-block. You can play Stonewall Gauntlet. They're not currently in this deck. But if you were scared of aggressive decks, you could play Stonewall Gauntlet. We are on a different glove for our Enigma matchup, though. We'll talk about that later, but generally this will just be 2-block. And sometimes, maybe once a game, you'll actually get the upside. But that's about it. Just 2-block. Snapdragon Scalers are here, so we can have a bit wider of a turn. Most of the attacks in this deck cost 1 or less. Some of them do cost more. So you won't be able to do it on everything, but generally you'll be wanting to play those to cost things at the end. It'll mainly be used on something like a Sensor or a Take the Tempo or I guess even a Mink Key to just give it go again when it normally doesn't have go again to continue your offense if you just get to keep a pretty big hand. We are not playing the Pouncing Paws. Those were a shoe that I was originally on. However, Snapdragon Scalers has definitely impressed me a lot more than the Tiger generation. So we are on 1 less block on our equipment, but it's not that bad when we consider the aggressiveness that this gives us. Pouncing Paws does kind of matter, though, because we are on a few small Tiger synergy cards, but realistically, it's not as good as the Go Again from the Snapdragon Scalers. With all of the main equipment out of the way, let's get on to the main board. This list plays a 22 blue and 29 red main board. That means we have 51 main boarded cards and a 9-card ad board. For our reds, well, first of all, we're not on any yellows. You wouldn't play Ardvor even if it was legal, and there's no good yellow attacks that would fit this deck that aren't in red, and you'd rather just play the red. You could play Iris Specialization, however, it very often does not hit, so we're not playing it, and it's not very strong. This is definitely just a mid-range deck that wants to go Kodachi card every turn, defend itself well, punch them down. You have a good turn where you can Snapdragon Scalers, great. You have a good multi-attack turn with an Estriker looking for a scrap, great. That's generally what you want to be looking for. Think of this deck as Azuri, but instead of trickiness, you're just doing raw damage to your opponent. So for that, let's start with the red attacks because they're very, very basic. The only that's not true. The only Go Again base free red attack we play. The only card we're on more than 3 of is 100 Winds. We're on 3 red and 3 blue. Now, blue 100 Winds might seem like a pretty weird inclusion considering that most of the cards we want in our deck actually block 3. We are, of course, on Wax Off, but I will talk about that one later. But blue 100 Winds is a card that plays very nicely with Tiger Stripe Shuko. Sometimes our hands turn into blue 100 Winds into Winds of Eternity, which the Winds of Eternity would get pumped. That can happen. The 100 Winds only being 2-block doesn't really come up most of the time, so 100 Winds being 2-block is perfectly fine. And then the red 100 Winds just gets to come in as a 0 for 3, has combo with itself. Also, these have combo for Flick Flacks, which are in our sideboard. So they get some pretty nice use on defense as well sometimes, because a lot of the other combo really is just our 3 blocks, our other 3 block blues. We do have one other red attack with 3 block in combo, but generally we'll want to be playing those because of just how much value we get off of playing them. Some other go again sources in the deck. We are playing 3 looking for a scrap because we are on a lot. We can afford to play a lot of blues with only 1 power. We are on 13 because a lot of the times when I found looking for a scrap, I've had exactly one power attack in my graveyard, and that was when I was on 12, so a 13th can help make this a little more consistent. And of course, if you find these later, you'll be blocking with some, so you'll have them in your yard. As long as you don't find these within like the first 2 turns of a game, you'll probably be fine. We're playing Enlight and Estrike at 3 because this card's just really good in a lot of decks like this that just want to have good 2-card hands. It can be a 0 for 5 go again if we want to go wide, a 0 for 7 if we want to go tall, or it can draw us a card if we want to keep an arsenal. So Estrike is just extremely flexible. We are on 3 red Bittering Thorns because this is a very, very good on hit. It doesn't even have to be threatened with Ira to be a breakpoint, which is really, really nice. And even if we do throw this with Ira and a breakpoint, our opponent puts 2 cards, because putting equipment in front of this might not actually help, because a lot of the times they'll have 1 block on equipment, which means they'll have to spend a card and equipment and not even block it. Yes, versus like Guardian, they can put equipment, but then they're putting equipment probably pretty early to when the actual hit +1 really, really matters. So Bittering Thorns is just a good go against source. It only blocks 2, but you're generally playing it out. And then the last source of go again for our, I guess in general, because it's really hard to give some of the blues go again, is Torrent of Tempo. This is a 1 for 5 with 3 block that has an on hit to gain go again. This card lets us play Rushing River, I guess, on combo. It's mainly here because it's a 1 for 5 that can gain go again versus our aggro matchups that won't try to block us. Versus the slower matchups, that's probably just going to be a 1 for 5 3 block, but that's still perfectly fine. For the remaining of the red attacks, we are playing 3 Take the Tempo as just a pretty good 1 for 5 that can give us a card for next turn. Everything in the deck is an attack action except for Wax Off and some of our other stuff on our board, so pretty much a large majority of the deck will be a hit for Take the Tempo, so it can just let us keep cards for our next turn, as well as if we can give it go again and we actually get the trigger off, we can play that card right away. Mink Key has a little bit of Tiger synergy. It's mainly here for a 1 for 5 with combo at 3 block. So you're really just playing it out for 5, but I guess sometimes, because we are on blue aspect of Tiger, we can sometimes combo it to get a Tiger and then send it in with the Mink Key, but don't ever try that specifically. Like, if it happens, sure, but don't play for it. 3 Censor, because this card's really, really good in Ira. Censor's a card that you do need to be a little better at understanding what's in decks to really play well. So I can understand if you want to swap it for something else, but Censor is an extremely good card in Ira, and you definitely should be on it. 3 CNC. I say it in every video, you can swap with some other stuff. There are a little less things you can actually swap it with, though. I wouldn't recommend putting in any 3 for 7s because they can mess up the way your deck wants to work. If you only have a 2-card hand, you want to send Kodachi and a 2 for 6 instead of a just 3 for 7. And we do have a Race Face and the weakest link in this deck already, so you'll be end up having to swap this out for something like an Amnesia or a Humble. Either one of them work, but CNC is, of course, the best option for this card slot. And then the last red attack in the deck for the main board is going to be 2 of Flying Kick. This card was originally on 3, but I found that you didn't need 3 ever. It's pretty much just a 2 for 7. If you throw double Kodachi, then this is a 2 for 7. It's the best card to play off of your Tunic, because off of 1 blue pitch, we can double Kodachi and swing it with the Tunic up. And you didn't really need 3, so I went up the extra 1 power thing for looking for scrap, just because I'd rather have that a little more than Flying Kick. But Flying Kick is very good. It's just a lot of damage, and it blocks 3, so it's pretty nice. Moving on to the blues in the main board, of course we already talked about the blue 100 wins, so let's talk about Winds of Eternity. This card just works really nicely versus some slower matchups because they have to block it or you get 100 wins back in your deck. Versus faster matchups, it's just a blue block 3 or generally never going for the combo into the faster matchups. And it also doesn't have 1 base power, which can mess up your looking for scraps, I guess, but we do have another 2 power blue in this deck that messed up looking for a scrap. It doesn't mess them up, but if you block with them early, they're not a 1 power thing. So that can hurt you in the long run at some point, but I think it's still worth it to have this and the other 2 power 3 block blue in the deck, which we'll talk about that now. Bine Center is a 0 cost 2 power 3 block. It combos off of Crane Dance, and it can't be defended by cards with power less than with cost less than our number of chain links. And if it hits, we make a Zen State Token. So that gives us a lot of defense, making that Zen State Token. And we do play Crane Dance. We are playing blue Crane Dance. This one combos off of Soul Beat Strike, which is a card that isn't in our deck, but notably it's here for our Snapdragon Scalers. We either want to use our Snapdragon Scalers to play another attack after a 1 for 5, but we can also use it to go with Crane Dance and find the center to make that Zen State Token versus more aggressive matchups, since the Zen State Token can really help us versus things like Runeblade especially, since it will prevent all of their rune chance, and versus any other deck that wants to go extremely wide, something like a Ninja matchup, since this can block out their lower power things. So I think it's definitely worth it. If you wanted to play an extra 1 power thing for looking for a scrap, I would definitely consider going down one of the Fine Centers over one of the Winds of Eternity, because I find the Winds of Eternity a little more playable, since you can really only do that line off of your Snapdragon Scalers, or if they give you a go again off of a Clash Wind, which you can do. You do have some pretty high power things, or Civic Steps. The rest of the blues are Wax Off and 1 power things. We'll go over the remaining 1 power things first. Of course, we're playing Crane Dance because it works with Find the Center. We are playing Rushing River because it's a combo with a card that's actually in our deck in Torrent of Tempo. We are on 3 Aspect of Tiger Mind because sometimes it's playable and it gives you a tiger to use with Mauling Key. And we are on 1 Pouncing Key because sometimes you get a tiger and you can play it with the Aspect Mind, right? Also, this card is probably the thing you want to put in with if you do go down the 1 Find the Center, because it actually has some upside sometimes. It's better than playing blues that don't combo with anything in the deck. All of these cards are here because they combo with something. Aspect off blues, Rushing with Torrent, Pouncing Key off our tiger. Sometimes, of course, Crane Dance is the only one that doesn't combo off something, but something else combos off of it. So, it's fully worth it. The last blue in the main board is 3 of Wax Off. This is in the main board because it's a blue. You wouldn't want to cut it. Wax On is in our sideboard for this card. So, I'd say it's worth it, because in the aggro matchups, you have the 0 for 5 block of a Wax On into a 0 cost attack, and then you get to play a Wax Off to make a Zen State Token to protect you for that turn and the next turn, which is incredibly good. So I really like Wax Off in this deck, and that's kind of the plan versus those aggressive decks, is to try and find a way to make a Zen State Token, because if you can, you're going to be in a really good spot, because you're going to get so much extra health. You'll get to save good aggressive turns to threaten their life total down. Now that we've looked at the main board, we can take a look at our inventory. This is a 23 card inventory. Again, we are adding in 9 cards. I want to start with the equipment because they're a little more basic. Zephyr Needle is going to come in versus decks that aren't playing defense reactions. The reason for this is since Ira's ability pumps Zephyr Needle to 3, if they're not playing defense reactions, it's extremely difficult for them to break Zephyr Needle, which means that we can play this, always swing it second, so we can use it with our Ira trigger and make this a make our weapons 2 for 4 every turn, which is so much better than 2 for 3. Even though this gets 3 blocked out, they're spending a 3 block on this and not one of our actual meaningful attacks. And they're, of course, never breaking it. Again, you're not bringing this into decks that play D-Reacts, you're bringing this into decks that don't play D-Reacts, so aggressive matchups. We do have 3 Arcane Barrier. This is a slower deck, which means against Wizard we can struggle a little bit. We are on Arcane Lantern because if we're swinging 2 daggers against a Wizard, specifically Kano, we're probably losing. Into Acilio, it's probably fine, but this is mainly for Kano. We're probably losing if we're swinging both. And you probably want Zephyr Needle into Acilio. I wouldn't play 3AB into Acilio, even though 3AB can be good into him. Which you could also consider it, just playing it. I wouldn't play Needle by itself if it's your only weapon, but you can play double weapon into Acilio. But this is mainly for Kano. Norrin Glove is probably the thing that comes in versus Runeblade. I think it's better than Tide Flippers because you'd actually want the Snapdragon Scales effect into the Runeblade, as well as any other 1AB matchups. I don't know if there's any other ones other than Runeblades, but you know, Norrin Gloves is really good at just being 1AB. And Ninja doesn't have any, like, Ninja has 1 AB equipment, which we are playing in Tide Flippers, so you do have to play the Norrin Gloves. And then finally, Tide Flippers. These ones, again, will come in versus Wizard, just because they're innate AB. We want our helmet, we want our chest piece. That's about it. You could play Norrin Chest if you really wanted to, but I want to play Tunic versus Runeblade, so maybe not. You could maybe go Tunic, or you could maybe go Norrin Chest instead of Arcane Lantern versus like Kano, and then play Norrin Chest, Norrin Glove, Tide Flippers, still have 2 daggers in your head, and that could be okay, but that one's up to you. I like this as my 3AB. And then the last equipment in the deck is a Vambrance of Determination, because Enigma is a very good deck, and you being a slower-ish deck, even though you can go pretty wide, is still pretty bad. You have a lot of hit effects that you would really like to hit, especially the weakest link and Command and Conquer into that matchup. Even things like Censor on a hit can be incredibly powerful. So Vambrace is really good versus Enigma. And then finally, for the actual cards we're going to be adding into the deck, I'm going to start with the defense reactions. Flick Flack is just a 0 for 6, pretty much. If you block with this and another combo thing on a turn as your 2 blocks for the turn, you're blocking 6 off just the Flick Flack. So if it's a 3 block combo card, you're blocking for a total of 9 on 2 cards, which is really good rate. That's pretty much buying you a free card. So Flick Flack is just a really good D-React. If you didn't want to play these, I would go for Sync. And if you didn't want to play the Wax Off, Wax On stuff, I would play Sync instead of the Wax On. Because Flick Flack is probably the best D-React you can play. And then the other slot is Wax On versus Sync Below. But since we are on Wax Off, we need to play Wax On. This is a 0 for 3 block, which is below rate for red. But if it defends an attack action with 0 cost, it gets +2, pumping it to 5, making it better than rate. Which a lot of the aggressive things are coming in for 0 for 4s, even sometimes 5. So Wax On can be a really good blocking card versus those decks that want to play a lot of 0 costed attacks at you. Especially since those are more aggressive decks, which you want the Wax Off Zen State Token for. The last defensive card in the sideboard is just 3 Sigil of Solace, because it gains you some life, pretty good versus Kano, pretty good in really late game matchups. Some decks that you bring in like double 2 for 6 Sigil of Solace, and you're happy about it. It's just a little more health. Finally, moving on to the last 3 cards, we have some more attacks. The Weakest Link is a really good card versus the decks it's good against, same as Erase Face. That's why they're in here in the board and not in the main deck, because they're not good into every matchup. you'll want to bring Weakest Link into your Illusionist matchups, as well as most of your Brute matchups if they're on a lot of the no-block cards. As well as you can play this one into the Lightning Heroes since they're very dependent on instants, and you can even consider it versus something like Verdance because she has a few combo cards that are instant. Erase Face will be really good versus the heroes that really need their talent in class. Think Earth and Lightning heroes especially, as well as a hero like, I don't know, what's another good example of a hero that needs Brute? This shuts off Blood Rush Bellow. I probably wouldn't play this against Brute because I'd rather have the D-Reacts. Maybe not Waxon, but so you could play this Flick Flack and Weakest Link versus like KO or something, and just have this to try to shut off Blood Rush Bellow. As well as this card is good against Mechanologist, makes other cards lose class. So you can play this one against Mech. This one's actually a lot better against Mech, and you can even play Weakest Link against them as well. But against Mech, you actually might want to switch to a Fatigue plan because your deck's a little defensive. This disruption is really helpful. You want both the reacts versus them, and you want both disruptive pieces. So you could like switch into a Fatigue plan with Sigil of Solace as well. You probably don't want Gravekeeping, but since it only blocks 2, but still, just a good card to have. And if you wanted to swap any of these out, again, you can play Humble or Amnesia instead. These are the 2 best ones. Humble would take like Erase Face's slot. I think CNC and Weakest Link are the 2 best ones to have, but right now Erase Face is definitely a lot better than Humble. So I would go for that one instead. Or go for Erase Face instead. But if you didn't have them, you could play Humbles. Or if you didn't have any of the other things, you could play Humble. And then the last card in the deck is 3 of Gravekeeping. This card is only here because of Count Your Blessing. Only play this versus Count Your Blessings deck. I guess if anything else cares about Graveyard, like, I guess a Cilio does kind of, but are you playing this into a Cilio? Maybe. Like, anything that cares about their graveyard. So Count Your Blessing decks mainly, but also some other things like a Cilio. It can help to get rid of sigils so they can't get them back. Or, I guess, technically into Levia, you can mess up their plans by getting rid of cards they can't attack with their banish 3 things from your graveyard. That can be pretty funny. It's never going to come up because you're probably not playing this against Levia, but it's just something to think about. And with that, that's going to be the end of the video. I don't know how long this one was. I did talk a little bit about pretty much every card. Ira is a very basic and fun deck, so if you did actually get out to a 5th anniversary event to pick up Ira, she is a very good hero to play. And as I said, if you are going to play Ninja, she is just the best one right now. We don't know what the new Ninja does from the Hunted, as well as we don't know what the new Ninja cards we're getting for Fi and the other Ninjas, but for now, like, until we get the Hunted, I think Ira's going to be very good. She even has a pretty good matchup into Jarl, I'd say, because you're not breaking Mask, you're not breaking Tunic. This blocks, but sure, like, you also don't really care about Frostbites as well. You can restrict, you can kind of play around them a little bit, and then Snapdragon Scales are really only used when you need them. So your matchup into Jarl isn't bad. Your Guardian matchup's really good because you are on double Kodachi, which is how Ninja kind of beats that matchup by getting them really low and then Kodachi locking them. So you have things you can do, but with all that, again, that's going to be the end of the video. I hope you all enjoyed. Next week, there's no more heroes to talk about. I don't know. I already did a video about the hero I played to top 8 of ProQuest, and there's no new heroes. So maybe some updated deck lists. Either it be maybe Kano. I don't play much Kano, but maybe a Kano deck list, since the deck did change a lot after the bans and also after the new cards that we got in Rosetta, but that one's not set in stone. I'll have to see what video we're going to do next week. Well, actually, the Jarl deck comes out end of November. If we get all of the Jarl cards, I'll do Jarl. But if we don't, it'll be Kano or like Dash IO, I think. I think those are probably the two best ones to do. I want to wait on a ban list, though, before I do Dio, because High Octane might get banned. I don't want to put that in the deck list if it might get banned. So most likely it'll be Kano, or I'll think of something. But I've rambled on way too long. I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.